Our focus today is on creating effective resumes that are going to be utilizing your experience as a Penn staff member, faculty member, whatever role you play at Penn, leveraging some of those experiences in the way that you want to present yourself in a narrative for the next role that you're applying to. And maybe that role will be at Penn, or maybe it's a higher level role that you're applying to, which will be fantastic. So we're going to talk a little bit about different aspects of the resume as we go through this to make sure that you are positioning yourself and your narrative in the most effective way possible. I am Dr. Joseph Barber. I'm the Director of Graduate Career Initiatives at Penn Career Services. So let's think then about what a resume is and what it's meant to do. It's a skills-focused document. Any of you who have put together an academic CV or in any way, shape, or form, that is not a skills-focused document. It's sort of I was here at this place and here was my advisor, and here's a presentation I gave. It's sort of it's a very bare bones thing. Everyone's CV is not the most thrilling document to read because there's no narrative as part of that document. The resume is a much more narrative document because it's about the skills that you're using in different roles that you've played. And because in each of the roles that you've played, you've used different skills in different ways, there are lots of ways to adjust the narrative depending on what you want to highlight about that role. So it's a very customizable document that allows you to sort of look at different elements of your experience and forefront those and really sort of come up with this new narrative about yourself. It doesn't have to be, a single page. If you're applying for roles in higher education, I've seen perfectly good 2-page, sometimes even 3-page versions of resume. That's no excuse just to sort of write everything and not think about, making it concise or not thinking about making it strategic in the way that you're presenting the information. But this idea of a 1-page resume in other industries might be more helpful, especially if it's a communications role, but in most cases, you're okay to sort of have multiple pages. Some of the challenges that people face with resumes then is you get so used to describing what you're doing in your role right now that it's hard to sort of step outside of that box and say, well, actually, I can describe that differently. I can think about these skills that I've been using in slightly different ways if I want to apply for this other role that needs those slightly different skills, right? So because you're so focused on getting your job done, which is part of the job, it's harder then to create language that is different from that. And with a resume, you need to do that. And obviously one of the ways to do that is to look at the job description and really pull from that some of the language that you want to use. But it's a process of allowing you to see that you can be different versions of yourself for different types of roles that you're applying to. And that's hard if you've really been focused on the role that you've had. You've had lots of experiences. Some of those are going to be extremely relevant to the role that you apply for next, and some of those are not. And so being willing to sort of adjust the flow of information that you have in your resume, sometimes including, sometimes not including information, is important too, because if you include too much information that is not relevant, then really what you're doing is you're diluting all of your relevant information in your resume. So, the more stuff that is not important to your reader, and that's your primary audience here, the less they can see the information that is relevant to them. So that's an important consideration. It doesn't mean that you never did it or that it's lost or it's not important if you don't include it. It's still there, it's still part of you, but you're going to use it much more strategically if you think about what your audience needs from you, not what you just want to tell them about your experience. So if we think about what a resume sort of does then, right, it's sort of 3 things. It's an introduction to you, the whole professional version of you for the hiring manager, for the hiring committee that you might be applying to. It's an illustration of how you've done some of the skills, the things that you do on a day-to-day basis or over periods of time. It's going to illustrate that. It's also going to illustrate some of your successes, some of your accomplishments, right? The outcomes related to the skills that you're using. All of those things can be captured in a resume. The trick with the resume, though, is it has to do all of that, it has to convey all that information when you're not in the room. You cannot fill in the gaps. You cannot say, you're reading that part. Let me tell you more about that. So the resume then has to live by itself. It's a 2-dimensional version of you, but the words that you're writing have to be as illustrative to the reader as they are in your own mind, knowing that your brain is always providing more context to your experience. So that's really the trick, right? You know yourself. And sometimes when you write about yourself, you're like, oh yes, that's me. And then, I read it and like, I don't really understand this because I don't live in your brain. I don't know that context. That's what the resume has to do. Now, in order to create effective resume, I think many people think about, well, I really need to sit down and I need to write this. I need to really focus on what it does and what it looks like. And you can spend weeks, it feels like weeks, updating a resume and adding a thing here and deleting another thing because now it's on 2 pages or 2 and a bit pages and you don't like that. And you tweak the bullet points and you change the margins. And all of that takes a lot of time, but isn't actually going to change much in terms of the impact that you make on the reader, right? Sort of mostly if you're focusing on the way it looks, it's all about the formatting and not about the content. But really, the content is key for a resume. So I don't suggest spending a lot of time in a vacuum looking at your resume and trying to change it. My suggestion is to sort of think about it from a slightly different perspective and leverage information that you can glean both from the job description, but also from other people who are doing the role that you think you want next, to understand the nature of the role, to understand the skills that they use in that role, to understand the challenges that they face in that role so that you can speak to some of those in your resume. And so, although we did cover networking in that last session, I am going to touch on just a tiny bit here, just to make sure that you see the value of how networking can make writing your resume easier. So the resume writing then is the tip of the iceberg for these other things that you should be doing as you are thinking about writing a resume, right? So that includes that solid foundation of understanding what are some of the sort of the elements of the roles that I'm interested in, what are the skills that they require, what are the nature of those roles. So understanding the field, the career fields, the industries, the offices, the departments, whatever it might be, so that you can position yourself for those is important. Reading about those is great. Speaking with people who have first-hand knowledge of what that feels like is even more effective because you get more information from those people. And then once you have some of that information, when it comes to writing a resume, you'll know what skills you want to highlight, and you'll know what experiences that you want to bring to the forefront because you have that information, and that makes it much easier. If someone brings in a student brings in a resume to Career Services for a resume review, and they don't really have a sense of what path they want, it's hard for us to give good feedback on that resume because every bullet point that I see could be written 4 different ways, depending on what it is that you want to focus, right? So without knowing what that target is, it's hard to create a nice solid narrative. So by doing that research ahead of time, you're going to be well positioned to do that. So let's think about the research then into roles that interest you and what that looks like. So this is one of the tools that we share with students, are first-hand Vault guides. And these guides provide very broad information on different career fields that are out there. So I've highlighted some of the ones that I commonly share with the graduate student population that I work with across 83 academic disciplines. So a wide range of people there, but consulting's there, and nonprofit roles are there, and biotech is there. So these are great foundational guides that you can just get an insight into what these career fields look like. So we often point students towards this. A couple of them that are perhaps more specific to the higher education field include the Vault Guide to Education Jobs, where, again, it gives you this overview, not just teaching roles, but counseling roles and academic administration roles. So it gives you a nice overview of some of these, some of the categories there. Now, many of you are in higher education already, so you know about these things, but again, you might look for other niches in the field that you know less about as you're making a career transition in the future. So Vault Guide to Education Jobs is one. And then the Vault Career Guide to Education is sort of a companion guide to that, very similar information there. But again, just the Vault guides cover pretty much every field to some degree that students, postdocs, alumni, staff, faculty may be interested in. And so these are great foundational documents, easy reads, not going to answer all your questions, but are going to give you a solid foundation for what that looks like moving forward. In terms then of speaking with people in those roles, this is where those informational interviews that Diane and Esther were talking about in the last session really come into play. So if you go onto LinkedIn, this is the same page that they shared in their one. This is the University of Pennsylvania school page, which is also the company page. Right where that big arrow is, you can see that there are about 20,000 employees at Penn. And employees is, from a LinkedIn perspective, is a gray area, right? So a student who works here as a TA might be classified as an employee here. A postdoc sometimes might be an employee. So it's not a perfect match, but it's good enough for what we need it for. So if I click on that, that's actually a hyperlink. It's going to take me to this list of University of Pennsylvania employees that I can then search by and filter through by various different factors. So I can find people that I know, my first-degree connections. I can also look for people who are my second-degree connections, people I don't know, but I know someone who does know them. And Diane and Esther talked about the value of those second-degree connections. I can also search by job title. In terms of if I was looking for someone who had a particular role, I could begin to narrow down the people at Penn who have that role so that, ideally I could reach out to them and ask them about that role. And if that was a role that I also wanted to apply for in the future, right? So that's a great way of doing that as well. Finally, you can also do a keyword search through those 20,000 people. And here's a snapshot of the people that came out when I did a search for diversity. So maybe I'm interested in moving into a role that forefronts diversity as part of that, whether in the job title or as part of the role itself. And so these are then some of the things that got kicked out from that search. And you can see that I've highlighted that some of these are current roles that people have, and some of them are past roles, both equally valuable if you're doing networking to find out more about those roles. Just another way to find people that you might want to have conversations with about different roles at Penn. Now, you can use the Penn directory, right? The Penn directory has a Penn key protected thing where you can search for people's names, but you won't see all their background. You won't see the journeys that they made to get there. You won't see some of the things that may overlap, from a school perspective, another institution that you worked with or that you studied at. So, many people want to find alumni from their previous institution who also work at Penn. And that would be a fantastic way of networking within the Penn system to help you as you're putting together your resume, right? So these are just examples of ways that you can leverage networking to find the people who are out there so that you can have these informational interviews, right? And again, Diane and Esther talked a lot more about this, so I'm not going to go into detail about the general approach to informational interviews, except for to say that, these are some of the questions that can sometimes be really helpful when it comes to resume writing. And this one that I've highlighted in yellow here is perhaps most helpful, right? What are some of the skills that are most valuable to you in your role? What are some of the situations where you have to use these skills, where there's a challenge that you'll face where you use these skills? This is a question that really leans into making the person feel valued about their lived experience, right? I'm reaching out to you because I really want to understand how you approach this and how you've developed these skills and what that looks like for you. But then as you think and listen to what they think about and listen to what they say, then you can say, well, they talked about this skill a lot. If I were applying for that role, do I have this skill, right? Is this a skill that I can build in my repertoire through my current role? Is this a skill that I have, but I just haven't really mentioned it very much in my current resume because it's only a small part of the role that I have right now, but I still have it. So, by listening to these conversations, you can then really begin to articulate a very focused strategy for how to put your skills that are relevant very clearly at the forefront of your resume so that the hiring manager looks at it and goes, this person understands the nature of the work here. They understand that these skills are valuable. So it's very much, a listening process whereby you're listening to the language that people are using to describe their roles, because that language is language that you want to use to describe your role, knowing that everyone's role is different. We all have our own jargon. We all have our own groups. We all have our own ways of describing things. If you are making a move from one office to another office that has a different focus area, understanding that their language is going to be slightly different and perhaps incorporating some of that into the way that you describe your experiences is going to be very helpful. It's going to sort of decrease the cognitive gap between you and the person, you and the hiring manager who's looking at your application. So very key to this process of reaching out to people as part of writing resumes. Let's jump now to the job descriptions, right? So in most job descriptions, there's 3 bits of information that sort of are communicated. They sort of describe the responsibilities of the role. In this role, you will be doing this. They will describe the skills or qualifications that they're looking for. We would love you to have these things. And they describe why you would like to work there. Here are the things that we can give to you for doing this work here with us, right? So that's the sort of information, the general flow of that information. And it's sort of broken down in this way. Most of it is about the responsibilities, a smaller part about the qualifications, and then a bit at the end, or the beginning, if you're Penn, about why you want to work at this institution. You do not need 100% of the skills that are listed or the qualifications. You absolutely do not. No one has 100% of anything. That's a wish list when you write a job description. I'd love for someone to be able to do all this stuff so I don't have to do any of it anymore. So if you can do about 70% of what's listed, then mostly you're going to be a good fit. If you can articulate how that 70% that you do have is a really good match, right? Obviously, if the role that you're applying for requires a skill that you don't have, and that skill or that responsibility is about 90% of the job, and you've never done that, that's going to be a bit of a mismatch there. But in most cases, there are opportunities to really speak to your experience and bring to the forefront those things that are relevant. So here's a position I pulled. This is the Director of Student Equity and Inclusion at Penn Law, I believe. And so in this sort of the general overview of the role, you're going to see some of the main themes that are important to understand, because those main themes should be some of the key takeaways from your resume, right? So knowing that they want someone to lead programming and lead approaches and lead initiatives, and to establish robust communication between student groups and other administrators in a sort of a liaising capacity, and to foster collaboration. If I were to look at your resume when you apply for this role, those main themes should sort of pull from the resume, right? I should be able to see them clearly. I shouldn't have to look for them. They shouldn't be hidden. They should be overt themes that you're sort of getting to. So pay attention to the summary, because that gives you a sense of the flavor of what your resume should feel like. Here are some of the job responsibilities, and this was a long list of responsibilities, so I just cut off a few here. In this first section, they're very, very, very keen on planning and executing. Plan, execute, plan, execute, plan, execute. So you're getting a sense there from their what that priority might be in terms of what they're looking for. Now, in many cases, the words that the job description is using are some of the words that you want to use. So you want to talk about planning, you want to talk about leading. The one I didn't like here is executing. I don't really like the word as a whole, but it's not a word I would use commonly in my vocabulary. But I think if you talk about implementing programs, you can get away with that. So not every word is going to be a good match. The reason that keywords are important is because for many organizations, and I don't necessarily know if Penn is there yet, but for many organizations, there's applicant tracking software that scans keywords from the job description, scans keywords from the resume, and compares them. And if there's a low match between the keywords in the job description and the keywords in the resume, then the software may designate you as not an application that needs to be reviewed by a person, right? So a person doesn't get to see that because the software says, I don't see a match here. Now, different organizations use this software differently. So I'm not saying that it's as simple as it's a gatekeeper and you can't get past it. But knowing that you don't know exactly what it's going to look like, thinking about how to leverage as many of these keywords as possible is going to be important. Now, that's sometimes silly stuff, right? So in the skills, they may say Microsoft Word and Microsoft Excel. And in your resume, you put, well, Microsoft Office, right? Or Office, right? And so Office, everyone knows what it is, but the software is looking for Word and Excel, right? So that's not a match directly in terms of those things. So pulling some of those keywords that are out there is important to integrate, because it's going to maximize your likelihood that there is no robot gatekeeper that stops you. So they're looking for someone with cultural competency. So if they're wanting people to be able to provide guidance and support on culturally competent and accessible planning. So knowledge of things is also important, right? Sometimes you can say gain knowledge of cultural competency by doing something. So gaining knowledge is a skill in itself. And if it's something that applies to the roles and responsibilities, then making sure that you highlight that is going to be an important part of that process. Provide training. So again, you've mentored people in your role, you've trained new people in your role, so you have a lot of that experience. Support recruiting, oversee funding. Some of these are very, very specific, but you get the sense that these are keywords that you can pull from. Now, their qualifications, most qualifications are usually bulleted lists, which is easier to see the things jump out. This is a sort of a paragraph. They do want knowledge of DEI, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion. So again, knowledge of is something that you can highlight, gain knowledge of X doing Y. They are using words here like demonstrated ability to design, plan, and implement, demonstrated proficiency in working with, established track record of collaboration. Whenever you see the word demonstrated in the qualifications, it really is a signpost for you to make sure that you have illustrated what that looks like and not just said, oh yes, I can design, plan, and implement programs. Demonstrated means I need to see what it is. I need to see the experience. I need to see the outcomes of it. So you really want a bullet point that specifically says, identified new programs, 5 new programs for a population of these students or these staff, and successfully connected with over 1,000 people over a 3-week period, right? So you want to make sure that that comes to life as an illustration, rather than just assuming that if you write under skills, program planning and implementation, that they're like, oh, great, that's what we're looking for, right? You can certainly list it in the skills, but you want to illustrate it in action in the main part of the resume. At the bottom, they say resume and cover letter. They say are requested, which is very polite. We are requesting this. So if they want both of the documents, send them both of the documents. Certainly, I think there have been situations, and many of you may have seen this too, where you're looking at candidates for roles in your office, and someone doesn't have one of the documents, and other people do, and you may preference the people who do, right? So because they have more information for you to glean from. This is a slide I shared. This is something I pulled from LinkedIn about cover letters and the importance of cover letters. I have discarded 99% who have no cover letters, or ones that I'm seeing with the exact same language. And the language that they talk about here is, after reviewing your job description, it's clear that you're looking for a candidate that's familiar with the responsibilities associated with the role and can perform them confidently. Given these requirements, I can do this. Right? There's no illustration here. There's no narrative. It's not context specific. It's just high level generic words that say I can do things, which isn't really enough because it doesn't tell your story about your unique experiences and skills. Now, we're not going to go into details into the cover letter in this session because we're going to fill our time just with resumes. There are a couple of workshops that I've done, video recordings on our YouTube channel where I focused on narratives and cover letters. So you can certainly take a look at those in your own time. Here's another role, Associate Director, Social Media Communications at Wharton. A nice overview, responsible for social media content, implementing social media strategy. Strategy is a keyword here to think about. Here then are some of the responsibilities and some of what I pulled out from that. So develop, implement, and refine strategy, right? And that's going to be really important because just doing it is great and having the experience doing it, but a strategy is thinking about what's the best way of doing it. So some of your language wants to reflect that in a resume. Develop strategy to do X, Y, and Z as part of the role that you have. Build and maintain strong relationships. And those are actually two separate skills, right? You can build a relationship, establish new relationship with three academic departments in Wharton to do this. And you can maintain relationship by setting up one-on-one meetings every week to share updates and answer questions, right? So those might be two separate bullet points to illustrate different aspects of those skills that they're looking for. Develop social media best practices. Again, not just doing it, not just sharing content on social media, but also saying, how can we do this better? That's part of that strategic thinking as well. And then this one is lots of stakeholders, right? We want you to engage with academic programs, alumni, publications, research centers, offices of the dean, academic department staff, and faculty. It's like everyone. And so in your resume, you really want to demonstrate in any role that you've had that you've worked with many different types of people in different roles at the same time and have been able to adjust your narrative to sort of match those people, right? So that's going to be an important skill to illustrate. Now, the people that you've engaged with in your current role, and for example, the people in this role may be different. And that's okay because your role is what it is right now, but you can certainly sort of summarize, establish effective working relationships with over 15 separate departments in the School of Medicine, for example, right? So you can quantify it without having to go into the fact that this was a dermatology and another department, which, Wharton doesn't really care about what department it was in that context. Again, here's some of the responsibilities that they are listing. A whole bunch of stuff here, but a couple of things to point out here, right? So they have a lot of knowledge of social media platforms as being key. So they've listed all these words: TikTok, LinkedIn, Reddit, Twitter. Those are, again, keywords that would want to be matched in your materials. You may not have familiarity with all of them, or you may have some familiarity, in which case you could probably still list it, right? You don't have to say that you're proficient in it. You just have to say that you understand it and you know that it exists. Communicate to people who don't get social media. Ability to explain social media and social media data in an understandable manner. So this is a communication role. How can you communicate effectively to different people in different settings? In your current role, you may be communicating something different, and that's okay. But as long as you can demonstrate that you've adjusted your narratives to match your audience, it's a good match. Tight deadlines, working with multiple teams, and again, building relationships, right? So these are all the things that jump out to me as things that need to be highlighted in your materials if this was a job that you're applying for. My suggestion is to go through literally with a highlighter and make sure that those words pop out. And then as you're working in a resume, you can say, have I touched on that? And have I touched on it in different positions that I've had to illustrate a long-standing set of experiences using that skill? Now, they have preferred qualifications as well. They have qualifications and preferred qualifications. You may not have some of the qualifications that they listed, but you may have some of the preferred qualifications, right? In which case that might balance out some of the things that you don't have with some of the things that they're particularly interested in. So if you have video editing or photography skills, that might be a really good incentive for them to be interested in you, even though you may not have everything that is listed in that other section that are there. Knowledge of and passion for the business world. This is going to be harder to cover in a resume. You can't really have a bullet point that is passionate about, the world of business. You can have knowledge of, gained extensive knowledge of business practices by doing X, Y, and Z. You may have taken a course that you can highlight as part of your resume. But the passion is really going to come through in the narrative of the cover letter and in the interviews that you hopefully get. So when you get to things like sort of emotionally resonant experiences or perspectives, the cover letter is going to be a really great document to leverage those. This is the tool that I was mentioning that is a great way of matching, to see how well you've matched your keywords. It's called Targeted Resume. It's a subset of this resume worded platform that we have. We have an arrangement with them so that students and postdocs and alumni and probably staff can use this too. So as I said, give it a go. I think you'll probably be able to sign in with your Penn key and password to do this, or set up your free account using your Penn email address. Again, the links to this are in the chat right now. But what this tool does is it does basically what applicant tracking software does. It allows you to upload a job description, you can cut and paste it in, upload a PDF of your resume, and then it gives you a match in terms of those keywords. And it shows you what words you have matched, and it shows you what words you haven't matched. It's not smart necessarily, so it's going to pick up words that aren't really part of the job description and that aren't really important, but it really helps streamline the process of saying to yourself, well, how well have I done this? Because sometimes it's hard for you as the writer to really know if you've done a good job of matching, because it seems like it totally makes sense to you. Your brain is like, yes, you are perfect. And then, your resume doesn't quite reflect that because your brain isn't being helpful. So, as you can see here, I have you can do an overall resume, a general resume, a targeted resume score, and you can look at the keywords that are missing, and you can actually go through and integrate them into a sample of the resume and see how that changes the score, right? So I didn't mention this, but I have that, and I can mention it here, and then you see your score jumps up to around 85 or 90, and then you're looking good for that. So a great resource. I did a how to make the most of targeted resume video, a very short one here. Well, it's not that short, 20 minutes one here. So if you want to learn more about that, if you can use it and sign on to it, then you might want to watch this video just to make the most of this for your resume too. Okay, so we sort of got through the concept, right? The concept is that you can't just write it. You have to do some background research. You have to speak with people to get a better understanding. And then you have to understand the nature of the job, which will be easier as well once you've done your networking, because everything will make much more sense in terms of the language. Now it comes time to the materials. And I'm going to give you sort of broad advice about what this looks like, because if there's any thing that's true, it's that people will give you different advice about resumes. Oh, yes, it should look like this. Oh, yes, it's 1 page, it's 5 pages, it's this margin, this font. All of that is perfectly valid, because every hiring manager in the world has their own perspective about what a good resume looks like. They're not all following the same book either. So taking different information and trying to apply it to the version that you like is probably the most important thing. However, the thing to focus on is the content, and is structuring the resume so that the most relevant content jumps off the page at your reader to make their life easier. If you send me a 4-page resume and all the relevant stuff is on the 4th page, I'm probably not going to get to it, because I may have decided already by the 3rd page that you don't have what I'm looking for. So structuring, prioritizing, using the language that I'm looking for, and really sort of centering the skills that are relevant is going to be important. Name, contact information at the top. Many people can start with a summary of qualifications. That's basically the conclusions of your resume that you want people to walk away with. Think about those overview sections in the job description. Some of those words might want to be featured in your summary of qualifications there. Totally optional section, but it can help sort of insert into the mind of the reader the takeaways that you want them to have about you right from the beginning. If you don't have the summary, then I read through and then I sort of make my own conclusions. If you do have a summary, then I sort of have an idea about what you are, and then I look for evidence of that going through that. So different ways of trying to get that information across. Anything that's mentioned in the summary has to be expanded on as part of the main part of the resume. You have to have it as an actual experience. You can't just say innovative leader in the summary and then not talk about leadership or innovative leadership in the experience section. That's just an empty statement at that point in time. So make sure that you do connect the dots between those two elements there. Skills are also great. We talked about keywords. There's a lot of things that you can list there: technology skills, database skills. They're usually sort of more technical, or language skills that you can list there. Again, the most relevant ones, if they list in the job description that they need you to use Excel, then yes, list it in the skills section, but show it in action in the experience section. Use Excel to manage a 10,000 sample database and create pivot tables to create weekly reports, right? So that's a much better illustration than just by itself listing Excel in the skills section down below. Let's start with some of the sections then. Name, any credentials you want to stick after that are great. You don't really need a street address anymore. No one's going to write to you. They're only going to email you. They may not even phone you. I hope they don't phone me. I don't like being receiving phone calls. But so you just Philadelphia, PA is all you need. And you also don't need to mention phone, and put the phone number and email, and here's your email, because they know what a phone number is and know what email is. So just streamline everything. The phone number itself, email, and Philadelphia, PA in most cases. If you are applying, internally, probably your Penn work email address is perfectly fine. If you feel like that's a bit wonky, then just use a professional-looking personal email as well. You can throw in your LinkedIn profile too, so long as your LinkedIn URL matches the skills and the experiences that your resume gets across. Your resume is customized for every job you apply to. Your LinkedIn profile is broader. So if you link to your LinkedIn profile and I get there and I'm like, well, this is confusing because this seems like a totally different person, then that's not going to help you. So it can be helpful, but you need to make sure that they are matched and balanced in the information that they're sharing. And if you do include a LinkedIn profile, make sure that you have customized it, right? If you don't customize your URL, it's going to look something like this. If you go to your LinkedIn profile right now and look at your profile, if you have a bunch of random letters and numbers after your name, it means that you haven't customized it. You can easily do that. You just go into edit your profile, create a custom version of these. Mine is, Joseph Barber, PhD, because I wanted to forefront the PhD, but also because other people had stolen Joseph Barber. Here's a video I did on LinkedIn best practices. This was part of our collaboration with the Penn Alumni Career Tools series. And look how excited I am in that video. It's very exciting. It's exciting LinkedIn stuff. Thinking about the order of sections, this really does depend on what your audience wants to see. So in most cases, your content information is going to go first. If you want a summary, that goes next. The thing that comes next is really wants to be the most relevant aspect of your experience. So if you are a staff member right now and you are not doing any, academic programs, then obviously your relevant experience, your professional role right now is the thing that goes first. If you're a Penn in a staff role, but you're also getting a degree that you want to leverage for the thing that you want to do next, then that degree may be more important than the role that you have at Penn, because potentially the role you have at Penn is to help you get the degree that gets you the role that you want to do next. So your education section might come first. So generally speaking, if you are currently a student, there may be more likelihood that your education section comes before your relevant experience. It all depends on the nature of your role right now and the nature of the role that you want to be applying to. Relevant experience, we'll talk about that in section. Leadership and community engagement, these are broader categories. You don't necessarily need these, but these are catch-all for things that aren't necessarily directly related to the role that you want to be applying to, but that you may want to highlight your ability to lead or collaborate or communicate with different people or gain knowledge. So if you are working in the community and those things feel important but not relevant, then having another section can be a great way of doing that. And then the skill section, bookending the skills, your summary at the top and your skills at the bottom can be a good way of finishing that up. Do you need personal information? Do you need hobbies? I would say no, unless they're really important to you, in which case, then that's your narrative and you can have those things. But in most cases, you don't need them. You have the choice to do that. Someone asked a question about education at the end of the resume. So, if you've done with it and it's a long time ago, that's perfectly fine, right? So if that information is no longer a key part of your current narrative for the role that you're applying to, then deprioritizing it is fine. Where it goes exactly in the order, that's up to you. If you want to put it at the end, that's fine. If you want to put it sort of just after your relevant experience, that's fine. Sometimes where you went to an institution can be valuable in itself because it might have some connection with the role that you're applying to. So certainly deprioritize it if it's not part of your current narrative. If you've done it 10 years ago and you're like, that was great, but that was a degree in history and I'm doing something totally different now, then it makes sense that you don't want that to be part of your current version of your narrative. So it's a good question. Let's think about that education section then, right? So again, some of the resources I'm sharing or some of the slides I'm sharing are slides that I often share with students and alumni. So they won't always translate directly to your role. But in the education section, really you need a degree, and the institution, if you're currently doing it, you need an expected date. If you have done it, you just need the graduation date. And then the relevant courses are a fantastic way of integrating more keywords into your resume, right? So you can say relevant courses include X, Y, and Z, and then you can list those as names. If they have cool, sexy names that resonate with the role that you're applying to, then that's fantastic. Those represent things that then will jump out at the reader because they say, I have knowledge of these areas. I sat in this room and someone talked to me, I have knowledge of these areas, and you can sort of leverage that. And there's other ways to do that, which I'll talk about in just a second as well. So those keywords, again, important for the applicant tracking software that might be used. In terms of formatting, what my recommendation is for whether it's a job description or a job role that you have or a degree is to put the thing first, the job title, then the institution, and then the date. Because the job title is the thing that I'm most interested in as the reader, and the degree is also the thing that I'm most interested in as the reader. So in this case, for this engineering student, University of Pennsylvania comes first, which is great, has a good reputation. But the candidate for Master of Science in Engineering is on the second line. It feels smaller. It's in italics, which actually makes it harder to read than easier to read, even though it's different formatting. And so it doesn't really bring that to the forefront. Also, if you think about what's prioritized here, the things that are bolded are the institution and the location. And the location is like one of the least important parts to sort of bold. My recommendation is to bold the things that you want people to see. Bold the degree, bold the institution. The location, the date, much less important than those types of things. Try to keep your formatting consistent, right? So bolding, plain text, italicizing, there's a lot going on here. You can sort of be a little bit more streamlined in that. And then we have the sort of the very picky, sans serif fonts or serifed fonts, the ones with the twiddly bits on the top. This one has the twiddly bits. When you're packing a lot in the resume, the twiddly bits actually can make it harder to read, right? So I sort of reformatted it in the way that I would sort of recommend. It's a plainer font, it's sans serif, the degrees first, the bolding is sort of focused on the things that I would want to get across. So these are some of the recommendations that I give just to make sure that that is streamlined appropriately. Then we have work and relevant experience, which is sort of a good thing to focus on just momentarily. So in your work experience, people often list, here are the things that I've been paid to do, right? So right now I'm an associate director at Penn. Before that, I was a project assistant at this place. And then back in the past, I was an intern at Macy's. Yes, this is your work experience, but this doesn't have to be your narrative as it relates to the role that you're applying to, because the role that you're applying to may leverage more of what you're doing in your current role, but also what you may be doing as a student at Penn, or what you may have brought from another experience at Penn. So just listing your chronological list of work experience is actually less important. Some people are worried that there may be gaps in the resume if I don't list everything in a chronological order or reverse chronological order. No hiring manager has time to look through gaps in your resume. And it's really, if you format it in different ways, there's no way to actually look at all the chronology in the resume anyway. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. I know that's easy to say, but I really wouldn't, because what I would tend to focus on in terms of the resume is changing work experience to relevant experience. Relevant experience brings together different aspects of your professional identity and just collapses all of the relevant stuff into a single section. So in this example, your role at Penn is perfectly relevant. In your degree, you've done a capstone at Penn that you're doing right now. You're doing a capstone project that requires you to do research and analysis into something that might be relevant. Those are skills that you can apply in the role that you're applying to. They ask for those skills. You can talk about those skills. In your master's program, you may be attending a course where you're gaining knowledge. And so the bullet point could be gain knowledge of DEI by attending this course, right? So it's a skill. You could be volunteering your time in a leadership role to coordinate the SALT conference or be a co-chair of the SALT committee, in which case the experiences there might be relevant to the role that you're applying to. And you can be volunteering out in the community doing things, and that might also be relevant. Now, only you and the job description know what's relevant in any particular situation. But this is a much better way of creating a narrative about your experiences that isn't just linked to, well, I was an intern back then, and not really, it doesn't really fit into the version of you that you want to sell right now or market right now for the role that you're applying to. So, that's going to be a key part of this process. Someone asked a question about certificates. And so I will touch on this slightly, but I can touch on it now as well. You can list things, but you should also integrate them into the experience, right? So if you gained a certificate, you might have a section of professional certificates. That's great, but it doesn't actually tell me anything as the reader other than you have it, right? And if I know what it is and I know it's valuable, then it's like, great. But if I don't, it's like, well, that sounds great. Good for you, right? And I don't know what to do with that. But if you can integrate it into a narrative, gained extensive knowledge of X by completing this certificate, then not only can you make it more of a skills-based experience, but you can list it and illustrate it in action, which doubles up on the impact that it's going to have. So integrating anything that you've done that's an active learning experience is going to be, that is going to be helpful as you're creating this section. Things that don't fit in this, you can make another section if you wanted to, right? You could have a professional experience section where you list some of the other roles that you've had. You'd want to minimize that so that you're not diluting some of your takeaways. You don't have to, right? You can just drop off things altogether that you did but don't want to talk about and just have your relevant experience. Again, a lot of it is up to you in terms of your narrative and how you want to frame that out in terms of the resume. But I think these are important things to sort of bear in mind. In terms of professional experiences where you may have promotions, but the job title didn't change, I mean, that's an interesting, if you have gained in superiority, what I mean, you've gone up a rank in terms of a pay grade because there was a promotion or an internal promotion, but the role itself hasn't changed. I think you can find language to talk about that in the professional experience as well, right? So you could say, given new responsibilities or promoted to this rank at this time for the work that you've done. If the role has changed itself, then you can just have it as a separate role. So for me, I was a senior associate director, but I was associate director. Those are separate roles, even though I was pretty much doing the same thing in most cases. But within a role, I think that's a good question about how you might frame that. I think if you don't frame it, then people don't know. So you definitely need to find the way to sort of situate that and make sure that that comes to life in the work that you're doing. So you could say promoted 3 times within role, based on oversight of this program or this initiative. Sort of something along those lines might be helpful. I'm thinking off the top of my head, so that may not be the best words, but that hopefully addresses some of those questions. What do you do versus the skills that you use? And this is an important consideration as well, right? So in any resume that I get from a student or a postdoc, I always look for half-line bullet points where there's only sort of a short description, collected data, worked with campus stakeholders, because I guarantee that, by being so short, I'm not going to have a very clear idea about what it actually means, right? I'm not going to have a good illustration of what that represents. So you're going to need to add more so the reader can picture what you're picturing when you think about this experience. So here's some more information. Collected data on student enrollment and shared it with supervisors. Worked with campus stakeholders. Now, worked is one of those words that you sort of want to try to avoid because what are you doing? I'm working, right? Working doesn't mean anything. I'm busy with things. So you really want to get to what work actually represents in terms of a skill, because that's the thing that's transferable. Working is just something that we do all the time. It's sort of a constant state of mind as opposed to a skill. So here's sort of the third iteration of this. Collected data on student enrollment with a data set of over 3,000 entries using Excel and shared reports that were used in this thing. So the outcome here is, I shared the reports that they were used. We'll talk about outcomes in just a second. Built new relationships. So rather than just saying working with campus, what I'm going to iterate is the built new relationships. We saw from the previous job descriptions, those types of skills are really important. Built new relationships with data analysts from 3 offices at Penn and coordinate monthly meetings to do that, right? So not only am I building, I'm maintaining those relationships as well. These are much more specific and nuanced descriptions that should be pulling from the job description as you're creating them to make sure that they really do come to life. When I work with students who are TAs and teaching, this is a good conversation that we have, because the tasks that you do when teaching are really not transferable to things beyond teaching, right? So holding office hours is really not a transferable skill. I've held office hours as a teacher, and I sat in a room for 2 hours and no one's turned up and I've twiddled my thumbs. That's not really the skill that I want to sell to people. But in order to do all these things, these are the skills that come to life, right, that you're using in order to develop curricula and create syllabi and engage with students and make sure they have all the information and create interactive activities. So many skills, and it's always the skills that are transferable. The tasks themselves can provide context, right? So you utilize communication skills to create engaging, customized materials for a diverse group of students as a TA in the chemistry course. But the chemistry course and being a TA doesn't have to be at the forefront of that. That's just the context in which you use the skill that you're then trying to transfer to a new role. So I just wanted to use teaching as an illustration of how skills are the things that you really want to transfer. And so this is where we think about the structure then of the bullet points themselves: skill, context, outcome. As you are writing each bullet point, it should follow this sort of narrative. I use this skill in this context to achieve this outcome. The skill, those first few words that you're using in the bullet points, should match something in that job description, right? You're really pulling the words from that job description. The context, if it's relevant to that job, you can go into detail. If what you're doing right now is totally irrelevant to that job, then you can minimize the context and try to sort of summarize it. So rather than working with the 5 departments in the School of Medicine, you don't list those departments, you just say 5 departments, right? You don't list dermatology and radiology and anything else because those keywords aren't going to be important. And then the outcome, you won't always have an outcome for the things that you are doing, but when you do have an outcome for the skill that you've highlighted at the beginning, you can talk about that, right? So the outcome is a great way of illustrating that it's not just you saying that you have the skills, but it's other people, but there's an outcome, a sort of objective outcome that can point to that too. If you look at these types of bullet points from a resume, you can see that sometimes you can't really picture in your mind exactly what the person is doing, right? Overhauled application process and internship application timeline. Like, well, I see that's important. I know that's what you're doing, but what does it give me as the hiring manager? What are you bringing with you from that experience? Strategic thinking, problem solving, working with campus stakeholders to do that, right? So there are plenty of skills that you could extract from that would be more descriptive than this. Again, here's some examples of turning a broad statement into something specific. These are probably something I pulled from an engineering presentation. So strong communication skills, collaborated with 3 chemical engineers and 2 of these people from 2 international labs to do these things. So what you'll see from this is that there's a lot of quantifying things here. And with 3 people instead of with people, with a team of 2 people from 3 separate labs, 3 people from 2 separate labs, adds tangibility and a reality to the description. So more isn't better. Collaborating with 5 people is no better than collaborating with 3 people, but collaborating with people sounds like it's sort of very vague. So the quantifiable elements make it come to life. So you really want to think about that as well as part of your descriptions here. And then just to illustrate that, this idea that you can't really have a one-size-fits-all resume or bullet point, right? So this is just an example bullet point. Collaborated with 4 students from 3 academic disciplines to develop a more effective way to scrape data on climate change from government databases. If I wanted to, I could rotate this skill around and prioritize different things. This is the same experience, but in this case, rather than collaborating be the primary skill, the primary skill is using the technology to develop an algorithm to scrape data as part of a 4-person team. If I wanted to prioritize the federal agencies or the databases because the role that I was applying to needed me to do that, then I could change the nature of that experience again. Use my knowledge of these agencies to identify the database that we scrape for data as part of a 4-person team, right? So you can change around the nature of the bullet points to suit the job that you are applying to. So they're very flexible, and you have to sort of learn to go with the flow in terms of creating these new narratives about yourself. Another video that is in the links that I shared, how do I tailor resume bullet points for a specific job ad? This is a 15-minute quick video that will hopefully elaborate on some of the things that I've talked about here. Honors and awards is an important section too. So, people like to list this in the academic world. They're seen as being good things to have. Sometimes, though, they don't really translate over to other people. Even within Penn, you might say, well, I have models of excellence. I have honorable mention. Okay, I have this thing here that says that. I'm always looking at the wrong way around. Honorable mention, models of excellence. Someone might read that and go, oh, that sounds great. And like, no, but look, I have a thing. And like, I don't really know what that means. So by listing it, it doesn't actually transmit information to your reader, right? You have to do a little bit more than that. When we get this career champions process in place, you may be a career champion. You may get a designation as a career champion that we give to you from Penn Career Services. You could list that, but then someone would look at it and go, yeah, I don't know what that is. And so it doesn't have value to other people if you don't make it have value. So the trick is to list it, but then to illustrate it, as we sort of talked about earlier. So the honorable mention, our office got that for the work that we were doing, working through the pandemic, as everyone was doing. And, so these are the things that perhaps led to that honorable mention, some of the examples of what that looks like. And I've listed the honorable mention as an outcome of some of that work. So I've tied those things together. So rather than relying on them to go, oh, that's marvelous that you got that, I'm illustrating the skills that are connected to that. All right, and that can be a really great way of making sure that your certifications, your honors, your awards, your recognitions really come to life. This might be what the Career Champions ones looks like. Gained extensive knowledge, took initiative to develop these things, right? These become then transferable skills where the Career Champion nomination or what we give to you in terms of saying that you're a career champion can be leveraged in the real world. Some common errors for today, spelling mistakes are a big no-no, obviously, because if you can't get 2 pages of information right, then that doesn't start off the conversation well. They're not by any means the end of it if you have spelling mistakes. In Word, if you have everything's in all words in all caps, there is a setting that says check spelling in all caps or don't check spelling in all caps. Sometimes if you don't have that turned on, you're going to miss things like professional experience because you'll never proofread titles. I guarantee it. You'll just skip straight over. So make sure your spell check is set to cover all caps as well. And then don't talk about arses in your resume. Assess is the right word, but sometimes, spell check says arses is a good word too, but it's obviously not the right word. Prioritize information within the different sections. So if you are getting a master's in environmental studies here and you're applying for a sustainability analysis position at Penn, that was a sustainability role looking for GIS. Right now, you can see in my coursework here, those things are buried midway through that paragraph. I can prioritize those by shifting around the order of things so that the most important words come first. The reader sees those immediately, and that's going to help satisfy their desire to have someone who has the things that they're looking for the role. This is an engineering student that I pulled this from. If the job that they were applying for requires C++ and SolidWorks, again, they're not the first things listed. It's very easy to shift them around so that they are, so that again, they jump off the page. And again, I would illustrate those in action in the experience section as well. I guarantee if you look at the dates in your resume right now, they will have hyphens that are different sizes with different spaces. Does anyone care? Well, the answer is probably no, but I care. And you'll care when you see them. You're like, I want to fix that. So just be consistent. There is no right or wrong way, but just make sure there's no inconsistencies there in your dates. In terms of spacing, don't cram everything in just to try to fit it onto one page, because that makes it really hard to read. It's like the difference between walking through a tick-infested forest versus a tree-lined alley with a breeze wafting through your hair on a cool summer's night. You definitely want the right-hand side. So space your resume appropriately so it feels like that as you're navigating through that process. So that you can space it not too widely, not too crampedly, but just sort of the just right aspect here, where the spacing between the sections is bigger, the spacing within the sections is tighter, so that they all feel like they're together, but there's still spaces so that the reader can breathe and process the information. And then finally, make sure that you get a review from someone else other than yourself, because whilst your brain is incredibly smart and helpful, it's sometimes counter-helpful by being so smart. So if you have looked at your resume for 100 times, your brain is like, I am so bored of reading about myself. I know this. I was there. I was with you. Stop tormenting me. And so if you can make sense of any of this paragraph here, that illustrates the power of your brain, that if you look at your resume, you just can't see the mistakes. You can't see the fact that your narrative isn't aligned with the role that you're applying for, because your brain is always interpreting and processing information in the background to make it feel like what you've written is what you wanted to write, because your brain is like, I got it. It makes sense. I understand, right? So always try to get feedback on your resume. Now, if you are a Penn staff, you can leverage the resume feedback that Penn HR offers staff. This is not offered by Penn's Career Services unless you are an alum of some of the programs that we serve, or a student in some of the programs that we serve. But this resume review process from HR is a fantastic way of getting feedback on your resume. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. Let's finish up with a few resources then. Some of these we touched on last time, but in Diane's and Esther's talk, but I'll highlight some of the new ones. On the Penn Career Services website, under Learn How To, we have prepare application materials. We have stuff for academic materials, CVs and teaching statements and research statements, also stuff for resumes for applying for a broad range of positions. So take a look at that. 10 ways to improve your resume. It's another video that I've positioned out there or completed. Again, I'll throw all the links into the chat right now so you have what I'm covering here. We talked about cover letters. These are the same videos I did before. Cover letters is another story in itself, so we're not covering that today, but it is important. One of the platforms that we have for our PhDs and postdocs is our Beyond the Professoriate. I think it's now called the PhD Career Training Platform. They have workbooks and videos and webinars on putting together materials for that leverage that experience. And so you can see some of those videos there. We point our PhDs and postdocs to this all the time. It's a great resource. The Vault resume guides, we talked about Vault in firsthand right at the beginning of this. Here are some of the resources connected to resumes that these guides offer, so you can take a look at those. Again, you're going to get not conflicting information, you're just going to get different information about what people say you should do with a resume. And that's fine, remembering that every hiring manager is different as well. You might hear about this in the big interview session, or not in the interviewing session workshop after lunch, but we have a platform called Big Interview. It has a video curricula for interviewing prep, for negotiating, for resumes, and you'll see that this is some great information on resumes here. They also have a 10-minute session on cover letters as well. So if you can access Big Interview, which you should, then you'll be able to take a look at this video curricula. Imagine PhD is a free platform that all PhDs in the humanities and social sciences can use. It's a career exploration planning tool. What they do in this platform is that they've grouped together different job families that people in these fields go into, and that includes higher ed administration. And you can see that, if we highlight that, these are roles that you are in right now. And what they've done in these job families, one of the sections that they have is a sample job description, a sample resume, a sample cover letter, where you can see what that looks like. They also have some tip sheets on putting together materials there. So again, all samples are good samples if it gives you ideas about how you can position yourself. But I wouldn't go out there and try to copy a sample, because it's not your narrative. You want your own narrative. If you're going into development, they have development samples as well. And what that looks like is that they have the job description, they've annotated some of the things that they think are important, just like I did earlier, and then they've shown how those things are implemented in the resumes themselves. So you can take a look at all those aspects there. What else do we have? Targeted resumes, someone just asked about this, and someone nicely shared that in the chat there. So do give this a go. Hopefully it will work for you, but it's a great resource just to play around with. You can do unlimited scans if you do have access to it. It's going to say, you don't have access to the premium content because we do not subscribe to that part. But that's an AI trying to suggest what you should say in your resume. And really, you want a person to help you talk through that, or an accountability buddy to help you through that as well. We talked about LinkedIn Learning last time. Get this service. This is free for Penn staff and faculty and students. You will have to pay for this if you are not Penn staff. It's part of the premium package otherwise, and that's incredibly expensive on LinkedIn. So go to this link. You might have it activated already. You just go to your profile, click on LinkedIn Learning at the top, and if you have free access to everything, then you're good to go. But pretty much anything that you have a question about, technology, a tool, a resource, difficult conversations, or whatever it is, you can find some sessions on LinkedIn Learning. And these are well-curated sessions that you can take a look at as well. So do leverage LinkedIn Learning because it's free to you. If you are an alum, you can certainly use our services, or a current student, and we serve your population. You can use our services as an alum. We talked about the Career Tools webinars that Penn Alumni Relations does in partnership with Career Services many times. We had someone from our staff doing a writing effective resume session. That's now archived. You can view that. This is free for you to use if you're not an alum either. Great to share with students and people who find this. So wonderful things here. I have a LinkedIn best practices. That was the one I showed earlier when I was overly excited about LinkedIn. Career coaching, finally, just remembering that these are resources that you can continue to access as part of your professional development. And that includes the resume development tips that are out there. And then they also have these video sessions. These are sort of broader professional development things to focus on, how to come to consensus with decision making, how to prioritize, all good things to think about as part of your own professional identity though. And then finally, the YouTube channel, which hopefully you'll subscribe to. If you want to get updates, or if you want to point people this way, that's fantastic for you to do that. And I think that leads us to the next steps, which is we are continuing to build up our resource toolkit that we'll be sharing with staff and faculty across campus as part of this initiative. We are in early days yet. We really wanted to sort of preempt out there some of this information to give that to you, but we're excited about what we can do with this program over the next year to sort of make sure that we are empowering our campus partners and stakeholders with information that they find helpful, either to support students directly or connect them with us.